you know you're using that word wrong? So sometimes asexual people get told by people who love irrelevant arguments that the word asexual is forever claimed for science to be about reproduction and can't actually be about anyone's sexual orientation at all. It's too confusing for words to have more than one meaning outside of science. You're giving us all a headache here. Because, dear God, people calling themselves asexual are actually very likely to be saying they are going to reproduce by budding. I admit this can be very confusing. I mean, how are you supposed to be able to understand the difference? If someone says, I'm asexual, after all, it's very likely that that human person must be saying they don't have sexual organs and plan to reproduce asexually. Words are so confusing. After all, historically, words only have one meaning, especially in science. For instance, theory can only mean a scientific theory. There's no such thing as any other dictionary definition in which theories are used outside of scientific contexts. A set of statements or principles devised to explain a group of facts or phenomena, especially one that has been repeatedly tested or is widely accepted and can be used to make predictions about natural phenomena. The branch of a science or art consisting of its explanatory statements, accepted principles, and methods of analysis, as opposed to practice. A fine musician who had never studied theory. A set of theorems that constitute a systematic view of a branch of mathematics. Abstract reasoning, speculation, a decision based on experience rather than theory. A belief or principle that guides action or assists comprehension or judgment, staked out the house on the theory that criminals usually return to the scene of the crime. An assumption based on limited information or knowledge, a conjecture. Ignore those last three definitions. Everybody really knows that that word has been claimed by science and cannot have any other meanings, even when the context makes it really apparent which one we're talking about. Expecting people to get context just makes no sense. Stop calling people tall right now. Tall is a drink at Starbucks. If you keep calling people tall, I'm going to mistake that tall person over there for a coffee and try to drink him. Hi everyone, welcome back to Letters to an Asexual. I'm Swank Ivy and this is number 112. Today I'm going to share with you an actual argument that we really do get in the asexual community regarding the use of the word asexual, when people will sometimes pretend that their problem with the whole idea is that we're using the word incorrectly. In fact, when people have a problem with us, that is not their only problem. Sometimes people actually like to pretend that the problem is with the terminology that we use. It is readily apparent most of the time when you continue to talk to these people that their problem was never actually with the language and that they aren't actually confused by it at all. And furthermore, actually have a bone to pick with us that's based on prejudice and misunderstanding as per usual. But of course, instead of watching a video like this one or educating themselves whatsoever by reading any scientific literature or talking to any of us, it's a lot more fun to just condescend and make uneducated statements about the orientation. So today's letter is going to be from someone who believes this way and shared that oh-so-educated opinion in the comments of an earlier YouTube video that I posted for education. And here's how this person's argument went. My main objection to this is linguistic. Homo and hetero are prefixes. A is also a prefix. The history of the meanings of these prefixes in the scientific community has a history that goes way back, like long before the identity of asexuality arrived. This new identity has very little to do with traditional definitions of asexuality. I'm talking about centuries of science here, not a fad for Oprah's show. Just because you misappropriate a word does not mean you deserve recognition. You can definitely tell that his only problem with it is linguistic. My reply. Before asexual was widely used, I called it non-sexual, but that aside, it's kind of ridiculous for you to refuse to recognize the existence of a group of people unless their naming conventions make sense to you. Your phrasing is chosen very poorly here when you say we don't deserve recognition just because we misappropriate a word. We're not looking for recognition for using a word, are we? As for Oprah and calling it a fad, that's unnecessarily hateful and dismissive. I should also mention that if you truly had only a linguistic objection to this, you shouldn't have any reason to attack the entire concept and belittle it by sticking it on par with a sensationalistic fad. Does its existence threaten you? I'm aware that the biological definition of asexual refers to reproduction. However, since a as a prefix equals not or without, it's accurate when describing our sexual orientation, and we're not less legitimate due to what we call it. So the condescending Mr. Linguist returns and says, "It's a very old fad, yes. I'm not hateful, but am dismissive. You do realize that I am of the opinion that you and others like you are carrying the torch by maintaining genetic integrity? I think that in the face of such a barrage of sexuality from media, it is only healthy that a population rejects the extreme mainstream to maintain a balanced environment, to maintain diversity. And for that, y'all do deserve recognition. But biologically, you are just as special as I am." I don't think I'll ever understand these people's need to put us in a category of claiming to be special. They tend to get really fixated on that we're trying to claim that we're special or different or biologically individual. And whenever you end up in a conversation with one of these people, they're using arguments that you didn't make and acting like they're your position. This is a very common logical fallacy, obviously, but I mean, what do I know? I don't even know what asexual means in a scientific context. My reply: I'm glad you're accepting of the concept of people like us, but 1, calling it a fad demeans it. 2, saying we're maintaining genetic integrity makes no sense, since being asexual doesn't mean a person doesn't want to have children. 3, in case you haven't noticed, people calling themselves asexual are not making any claims about biological specialness. If you want to argue about something, address points the other person made, not stuff you made up. Dude comes back again. Right, you don't see a problem with using asexual because the media uses it, and you're in good company with bisexuals. When it comes to being threatened, yes, I am. Science is constantly under attack from both populism, politics, and religions. Do you recognize me as a monosexual? You shouldn't. It sounds stupid, doesn't it? Why? Because it is. You are not a eukaryotic cell. They reproduce asexually. They are asexual, totally asexual. Non-sexual is a better word for your lack of activity. So, this is me. The integrity of science is not under attack because people choose a word to describe themselves, which also has meaning in a scientific context. We are not challenging or attacking science or language by using the prefix a, meaning not, along with sexual, to describe our orientation. No one is suggesting that the word's use in science is to be taken away. We, however, are not describing our reproduction, but our orientation. And calling that an attack is alarmist. So now he replies to me and he begins flailing a bit. His response: obviously, you are not talking about reproduction. You are trying to not talk about reproduction. You have nothing to do with reproduction. Your video here is displaying all the behavioral qualities of asexual non-reproduction. So funny. If you really think you have no sexuality, then we're in an impasse. And I know that I have better things to do than to argue about your special brand of whatever it is that you and yours aren't doing. So, I'll bid you adieu. My reply: you appear to be objecting to our use of the word asexual because it has a context already describing reproduction. That was your initial statement. I'm saying that we're using the term asexual to describe not experiencing sexual attraction to others. It's a state that needed a name, and the community has settled on this one. It's not misleading, since no one thinks we're using it to describe reproduction. I don't know why you keep harping on us thinking we're special. The fact that you keep dragging out weird statements about us wanting to be special and unique through using this term are a little troublesome. Nobody's trying to say we have different biology. Most of us don't. And none of us are looking for special treatment. I'm not clear on what your argument actually is, since you started by saying it was linguistic, and now you're spewing about how we're not special. Surprise, he did not bid me adieu. It is alarming. It seems a kind of population control, and also likely a very responsible choice that respects not just human quality of life. What really worries me is that one would find themselves in a world where they'd have to be vigilant against a veritable onslaught of market sexuality. Pop sex is force-fed to us from before we learn to read, and it's more than a little bit frightening, even for a breeder like me. I think you should change your tone and keep up the good message. And I said this: no, asexuality isn't population control. That would be a side effect of celibacy. Though many asexuals do not procreate, it's not like it's against the rules, so to speak. Many of us choose to have children. And there's no statement of vigilance or being anti-sex. Many of us are sex positive, as long as the sex doesn't involve us. My message about awareness for asexuality doesn't need its tone changed. You appear to think my message is something other than what it is. So at that point, he had nothing else to say to me. I guess I was dubbed a waste of time. This is just one of the ways the terminology argument can go. Many of us have heard it. Some of us have been jokingly called plants or amoebas in similar, if you can even call them, arguments. But honestly, if somebody doesn't understand the orientation, or they make a mistake about what it actually represents because they're oversimplifying what they think the word must mean, it's fine to just ask a question, like, what does that actually mean to you? How does it apply to your orientation? What does that mean about your behavior? They can ask respectful questions instead of grasping at straws, trying to insist that we mean something other than we do, and are thereby destroying a branch of science. Somehow we have that power. It is very strange that sometimes people will get very, very hung up on the terminology. And the fact is, especially just one of the lessons that I have learned as a person who wrote a book about 10 years ago, is that terminology does evolve. And especially in growing, changing communities like the asexual community, like many of the queer communities, LGBTQ+, identity-related communities, terminology is becoming ever more nuanced. It's not a bad thing. And it's okay if somebody looks at it and thinks on its face that it's either something that doesn't make any sense or confuses it with some other term. But whenever somebody comes into the conversation being really dismissive and disrespectful about the terminology that you use, you know that the underlying problem that they have is not about not understanding the word. It's not about just not knowing what you're talking about. It's about having a belief about you that is inspired by bigotry. And they may ask you to justify viewpoints that you don't hold. They may ask you to explain attitudes that you don't have. They may be making assumptions about whether you have sex, whether you plan to have children, and their opinions about what they think your conclusions are already splashing all over you before you even declare what they are. I used to have more of these conversations than I do now, partly because they are a waste of time, but it was worth having once and then making an educational tool out of. Unfortunately, people who are going to end up having this conversation with their loved ones or their acquaintances or their coworkers will not be able to avoid the conversation quite so easily as I could in the comments of a YouTube video. So it's good to know what to expect and how to approach it. And I recommend, if you are going to approach having this conversation, you may start asking them a question. What do you think asexual means? Where did you get that idea? Did you just make it up? Are you making assumptions? Or would you like me to explain how it is defined by the people who use it as a as a term for their identity? You may actually be able to have a productive conversation with someone who came in with a misconception if you handle it well, but unfortunately, it's not even about how well you handle it most of the time. If somebody is in a conversation with you, determined to judge you, determined to slap labels on you and tell you that you're a silly fad for Oprah's show, then there's just not much you can do about that. That is not a conversation that you should sacrifice your well-being to have, because the person is clearly not there to grow their understanding. They're there to put you down, or they're there to laugh at a concept that they made up, and that shouldn't have to involve you. So it's perfectly legitimate to nope out of that conversation. With that, let's wrap this one up, and I will see y'all next time.